You have the card there. You have the bed.
Once again, if you're not presenting, please go ahead and put yourselves on mute. If you've connected with your phone, put your phone on mute. If you are on a computer or an iPad, the mute button is on the lower half of the screen. It looks like a little microphone, and when it's red, you're on mute. When it's not red, you are not on mute. All right. Well, it looks like we can get started here. Councilmember Lee, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, shit, some people have their camera on.
Sure, I can kick it off. I'd just like to say thank you for everyone today. This our council meeting, which took place on Monday, at which we spoke about possible changes to police budget and policy. Its aegis came sort of both from Councilmember Sahli-Wells and our GPAC member, Cicely Behringer. We thought it appropriate, and it was Cicely's idea, to have an event on June 9th. And I just sort of want to emphasize, I'll say a few words later, that we really want to hear what people have to say more than anything. We'll have a few presentations at the start, but we're really here to listen to you. And with that, I'll turn it back to me for some welcoming words as well.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. This is we're kicking off maybe a series of meetings and teach-ins from the Equity Subcommittee, my colleague, Councilmember Daniel Lee, and myself. Again, for those of you joining us, please put yourselves on mute. Every participant is going to need to be on mute, otherwise we're not going to be able to hear one another. Thank you. And so obviously we're in an historic moment in our nation's history, in our city's history, where we have a real opportunity for change, and changes residents have been asking us for. And so as my colleague, Councilmember Daniel Lee, has said, we're here to listen. We know we had a meeting on Monday, a council meeting, where we started talking about police policies and budgeting issues. And we know that that's going to be a long, and so it's going to be really important for us to hear from a lot of residents. And also we have today a special opportunity with Juneteenth to be able to recognize the importance of this day. And thankfully we have Cicely who's going to do a presentation on that. And we also have some students who are going to join us and talk about their movement for change as well. So I want to give a couple of ground rules for the meeting, because sometimes these are really hard conversations. We want to make sure that we're respecting one another, giving each other space. Obviously, mute protocol is really important. Having a lot of Zoom meetings, if you are not on mute, it is impossible for people to hear one another. So unless you've been called upon to speak, please do remember to mute yourself. Honor everybody's time. So we'll try to get through the program and then be able to listen to you all. And then we just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware that this is a public meeting. It is recorded. It is public and available for everybody. And it will be shared, posted to the city's website and on social media. So please keep that in mind when you're making comments, that this is for posterity, folks. And if you don't wish for your image to appear in any photos, please turn your camera off so that won't be an issue. With that, hand it over to my colleague Daniel Lee to introduce Cicely. Cicely, there we go. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. And before I introduce Cicely, I just wanted to say a couple more words about the moment. I think it's very appropriate that we're having this conversation about policing on Juneteenth for a variety of reasons. Anyone who has had the opportunity to read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow sort of know about the history of policing starting as slave patrols and sort of morphing along the way of our country's development. A lot of us know about the Jim Crow laws and the black codes and the poll taxes and the citizenship test that African Americans and people of color had to go through to get the rights that were supposedly conferred in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. I think it's incredibly appropriate for us to really critique what we have been taught when it comes to history, what we've been taught that is not true, and then, of course, what was left out. I think in that context, Cicely is really going to fill us in. There's been a lot more awareness around Juneteenth in the last few years, but I really don't think people have a really deep understanding of what it actually is and its place in the Black community. So I was very happy when Cicely reached out, not only to see if we could do an event on Juneteenth, but if we could do a series of events that would provide a venue for collective education, community education, and really sort of community brainstorming as well. And I think this will help both inform our process and the policies that we support as a council going forward, but it will also help our general plan process as we look towards trying to incorporate new ideas around the future of public safety into that process. So with that, I'll introduce Cicely. I'm not big on reading bios, so I will skip through it a little bit and she can fill you in if there's something significant that I missed. But she's a fifth generation Angelino, veteran public school teacher, I believe both LAUSD and we had some conversations offline, Inglewood as well. She's lived in Culver City for 12 years. She has 4 children. Her kids went to El Marino, Culver City Middle, and Culver City High School. She's an active volunteer in our community. She was one of the people I appointed to the General Plan Advisory Committee from recommendations of Dr. Kelly Ken and some other folks. She was very kind to allow me to interview her for a program I'm currently in at USC. And I submitted to an interview with one of her partners for her current course of study, getting a PhD in education at UCLA. This was, as I mentioned, partially a town hall idea that came from Councilmember Sahli-Wells and an idea that was simultaneously suggested by Cicely. And I'm happy that we're going forward with it. And with that, I'll hand it off to Cicely so she can educate us more about the history of Juneteenth.
Daniel, and thank you neighbors for showing up, all of our wonderful Culver City residents, as well as guests from the wider area. So tonight, I just want us to kind of relax. I am a school teacher for young children, so I try to keep it moving somewhat quickly and engaging. And there's an opportunity for the audience to engage as well. So I have a slide presentation, so I'm going to ask for those slides to be put up now, if possible, and we'll get started.
Yes, give me just one moment.
Okay, sure. So while you guys are waiting, if you're interested in doing the interactive portion, if you have a secondary device like a telephone, if you're not already on your phone, or you have a device nearby, you can go to a website called Menti, and it's spelled MENTI.com. And in just a few, we'll be doing some little audience poll icebreaker icebreaker activity. And again, that's Menti, spelled MENTI.com. And once you're on that website, you'll see it's asking you for a code. So we'll display that in just a moment. So I don't know about you, but as a little child, you know, I was told never to talk to strangers. And so I would like for us to get to know each other really quick in a kind of a informal way, using this menti.com. And if you aren't able to use it, you can definitely use your chat, but we just kind of want to see who's out there in the audience tonight and representing your neighborhood. So if we go to the next slide, then there is a link, or actually, I'm sorry, one slide back to the welcome slide. There's a link, and that'll take us to our Menti. That link. And we just want to find out where everybody is from. So if you're on Menti on this slide, you should be able to see when the slide materializes.
Cicely, is there a code? I'm on the.
Yeah, so there should be a code, but I'm not, for some reason, Serena's slide is not showing up when she did the link. So I'm not sure why that is. And if not, yeah, I'm not sure. Serena, the link is not, it's not displaying anything on the screen.
Yeah, I don't have a link here.
Oh, okay.
We will have to get to know each other at a later time.
Okay, so you can feel free to chat it in on this, and you can just chat in your neighborhood. I'm from Sunkist Park, so I'll kick it off there. Yeah, so we can continue then through to the next slides. So this is just a picture of me to give you a visual. As Daniel mentioned, my family's lived in Los Angeles since 1908, but my grandfather is from Texas, which we're going to learn why that is so important on Juneteenth. And he moved to California in the early 30s, but before that, as Daniel alluded to, he also had some problems with law enforcement, I'll just say, in Texas, and I'll get into that a little later. So good to meet everybody, and good to see all the chats from where you are, where you're coming from. All right, so we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so up at the top, I just have a quote that sort of inspired this series, and that's a quote from the great Maya Angelou. She said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." So that's the whole theme of this, is knowing better and doing better. A lot of times we have the desire to do better, but perhaps we're lacking in some of the knowledge about how to go about making that happen. So that's what tonight is about. It's about starting a series of getting to know things better so that we can do better as a Culver City community. So Juneteenth is a tale of two Independence Days. Freedom is often contradictory. And I just pulled out from the Declaration of Independence. We all know this line: we hold these truths to be self-evident. And so we have here on the left side of your screen a shot of the Declaration of Independence. Everybody knows Independence Day. It's coming up July 4th, 1776. While at the same time in our nation, we have the sale and the importation of millions of Africans from Africa into the Americas, being sold as slaves. So when this document was signed and written, we already had over 100 years of slavery in what would soon become the United States of America. Both were realities, both were true, but it's, as we say, complicated and contradictory. So we can move to the next slide, please. So freedom is also often withheld and delayed. So on the eve of the Civil War in 1860, there were an estimated 4 million African-American men, women, and children enslaved in the United States. As we all know, Abraham Lincoln in 1863 issued the Emancipation Proclamation, granting freedom to the slaves that were residing in the Confederate States. And I put that in caps because it's important to understand that this law only applied to the states that were in rebellion. So Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, and Missouri were all slave-holding states, but they did not secede from the Union. They were not Confederate. So slavery was not abolished in these states at that time. So we can go to the next slide. And yeah, if we can move. So despite our fascination with Lincoln's proclamation, it actually did very little in terms of actually freeing any enslaved people, because as you can imagine, it could not be enforced. It was only applying to those states that were in rebellion. And as you can imagine, if you're in rebellion, you're not going to follow the laws of people you're in rebellion with. So it really was a nice gesture on paper, but it wasn't something that could be it really didn't have any teeth. So it wasn't until the Civil War ended with the Confederate surrender in 1865 that this proclamation could be fully enforced. And so even though it could be enforced after that, it took some time to get the word out. As you can imagine, we didn't have Zooms, we didn't have Instagrams or text messaging or social media to get to spread the word quickly. So it took a long time. So what we're celebrating today on June 19th is the 1865 arrival of Major General Gordon Granger when he got into Texas, which was considered the Deep South, and he read aloud the Proclamation of Freedom. And at that time, there were about 250,000 enslaved Blacks in the state of Texas. And also, it's interesting to note that many of the slaves that ended up in Texas were actually pushed west during the Civil War because there was the thought among slaveholders that they could, in essence, stash their enslaved property in Texas because the battlefront for the Civil War was not really happening in Texas. So the thought was we can move our enslaved property west and kind of hold it there in safekeeping. And, you know, if we win the war, we can go reclaim our property and then we can go back to business as usual. So there were many people that were moved there intentionally as a way to hide them, in essence, or to, you know, put them on hold until they could be brought back into service. So when the General Gordon got down to Texas, he advised the people that he read the proclamation to that they should actually stay in place. That was his advice: stay in place, but you now have a new relationship with your former master. You will now be employee and employer, and you will, you know, ask for proper wages. And so I am a descendant of some of those newly freed African Americans in Texas. And many just stayed in place, and we have the system of sharecropping and you know, tenant farming, which took place for a lot of the majority of African Americans there. And in the case of my family, my grandfather, you know, wasn't really happy with the system, but as a young teenager, about 13 years old, he was subject to what became known as the Black Codes. And so these were laws that were put into place, and this is where it ties in with the law enforcement, where there was something called vagrancy. So if you were a Black at that time in these states where these codes existed, if you didn't have a job, if you were just out walking and you didn't have proof of a job on you while you were walking, you could be picked up by police. And this is what happened to my grandfather at the age of 13. And he was imprisoned. He was imprisoned for about 2 years in Texas as a young boy. And as it's told in my family, he became basically a house servant for the warden of the prison in that part of Texas. And he's from Wharton, Texas. And then later on, he was, you know, served his time for being a 13-year-old without a job, and then made his way to California. So millions of enslaved Blacks had languished in slavery a full 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so it was a day of great shock and celebration. And For many now, it's considered the true and complete Independence Day because 4th of July did not apply to millions of people as it was celebrated prior to 1865. So 1865 really marks the beginning of a more inclusive independence in the United States. And we'll move on to the next slide. So what has Juneteenth got to do with us in Culver City in 2020? This is a long time away. We're not in Texas. We're not in the Deep South. What does it have to do with us today? So this is taken from one of the proponents of Juneteenth, Clifford Robinson, and I thought he really sums it up well. It's a time for reflection and rejoicing. It's a time for assessment, self-improvement, and for planning the future. Its growing popularity signifies a level of maturity and dignity in a miracle long overdue. In cities across the country, people of all races, nationalities, and religions are joining hands to truthfully acknowledge a period in our history that shaped and continues to influence our society today. Sensitized to the conditions and experience of others, only then can we make significant and lasting improvements in our society. And we can move to our next slide. So for me, it really starts with listening, acknowledgement, and empathy, which I think was captured in Mr. Robinson's quote, that just like we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that there are sometimes situations where we can be in identical circumstances, identical events in history, but it can be experienced in completely opposite ways. And yet both of those experiences still hold truth. So not unlike the stark differences in how the free white people and the enslaved people of our nation experience things like the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights, or even the 4th of July, it's still possible for us in 2020 in Culver City to experience the same events and entities in completely true, yet completely opposite ways. And so now I invite, actually going back to that one slide, there's a link to a very short video, but I think it really captures this idea of something called the empathy gap. And so this is what we're trying to close that empathy gap with discussions like these.
Having stopped now, a highly
We must watch the commercial first.
and child sizes.
And the picture's not displaying.
And breathable layers of cotton polyester blend cloth.
Yeah, I think there might be an issue with links and loading time. Do you think it would be valuable to hear the video, even if we can't see it?
Yeah, I think it could be. We practice it, but of course, things don't always work in real time.
Oh, then I would suggest we just play it then, even if we can't see it. If it's sure we can hear it, and use our imaginations.
Okay. So yeah, so Ms. Wright, if you're able to pull it back up. There we go.
And in the meantime, we've got folks in the chat box asking to share the link with us so folks can see it individually. So if Cicely, if you have a moment later on to share the link directly in the chat box, then other folks can see it.
Okay.
So what is the empathy gap? How would you describe it?
Well, it's quite basic. However, it's still challenging. Empathy is basically listening and attempting to understand someone else's experience, someone else's perspective, someone else's world. And what makes it challenging, Harmela, is the fact that it's often confused with sympathy, where I'm here, you're over there. I'm not listening as much as I'm looking. And I may say, hey, it sucks being black or brown, but that doesn't help me understand or even listen to the reasons that it may be a bad experience at this time.
And to that point, a lot of the times it looks like and it feels like people are taking what someone else says so personally. So what is it about, how are people generally processing this uncomfortable information that makes it difficult for them to actually really hear what the other person is saying?
Well, for one, the person has to truly attempt to understand and listen. From a sympathy perspective, it almost sounds like you're crying out for help and almost helplessness or hopelessness from a sympathy perspective. So sometimes people don't go beyond that and they start judging and saying things like, oh, it's not so bad. This happens all the time. But the moment you listen, the moment you attempt to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and it's more than just putting yourself in their shoes. It's truly feeling that experience and embracing that experience. Oftentimes at that point is when someone says, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, I so rarely, unfortunately on social media, I so rarely see people cross over or get to a point where they feel like, or it looks like they've expanded their understanding. It's really people just sort of pick their sides and find their groups, but there's not so much crossover. You say acceptance does not mean you condone the behavior. What do you mean by that?
Well, not even necessarily acceptance. Understanding doesn't mean you condone the behavior. And what I often like to use as an example, teenage behavior. When teenagers misbehave, particularly in academic settings, it's important to understand what contributes to that misbehavior. But it doesn't mean that the behavior in and of itself is acceptable behavior. And that's the discussion when it comes to Black Lives Matter. When I talk to my colleagues and associates that Black lives do matter, I often have to explain why that's the conversation. And they see it from a sympathy perspective. I say, hold it. The reason Black lives matter is it's not saying that any other lives don't matter. It would be the same as if there was an epidemic with whales that are dying and people are walking around saying, save the whales. It doesn't mean that you're not saying save the sharks, save the hammerheads. What it's saying is right now, what's happening to the whales is unacceptable. So I have to often explain that. And that's moving from that sympathy level to an empathy level. And the people who are sympathizers, they're really taking it personally that you don't get it. I'm not a racist because I'm saying all lives matter. What they're saying is they're not empathic.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned through work is that a lot of the time people are not able to hold two truths in their heads at the same time. It either has to be one thing or the other, which is to me, such a fascinating psychological issue. I want to also talk about trauma and the role that it can play in how people take in information and how they communicate. So how does it manifest and what are some tools for people to deal with their own trauma as well?
Definitely. And it just kind of piggyback what you said about the diametric opposing perspectives oftentimes. Our brain, we want black or white. That's how we want to simplify things. When the actuality is we live the majority of our lives in the gray. And that creates cognitive dissonance, basically that we need to make sense of it. And sometimes we just don't care to be critical thinkers. And as it comes to trauma is a very subjective experience. Oftentimes when people think about trauma, they think it's an event. And they say, oh, that wouldn't be traumatic to me. Well, it's not to you per se, it's to the person experiencing it. And what we can do about trauma is to first address it. The fact that what are we carrying? And if we don't address what we're carrying, we end up bleeding on people who didn't cut us.
Ooh, that's deep. Okay. One really quick thing we just want to ask you, how do we move forward? What is the way to move forward as far as trying to communicate about all of this injustice that people are out protesting about?
So again, we do apologize that the picture was not able to be seen, but we will share the link to the presentation afterwards. And so tonight is really about trying to begin to approach these things with listening and empathy and open hearts to understand that two things can be true at the same time, and there can be multiple truths, multiple experiences. I like to use the example of you and I might go into a grocery store and you might go to check stand number 12, and check stand number 12 may be moving very fast that day. And then I go in a week later and it's moving very slow. And it doesn't mean that either of us is lying about our experience. You've had a fast checkout and I've had a slow checkout. It just means that our experiences have been different, and we can start to imagine what it must be like to be in each other's shoes. Invitation. And so we're going to switch gears over to, we have some youth with us in the house tonight, and they're going to share their experiences. But again, we just want to keep in mind that empathy as we go forward tonight.
Thank you so much for that, Cicely. So we have the pleasure of having some student presenters from Culver High who are also members of People of Color for Change. We've got this evening Nasheen Mong, Kiana Roman, and Kaylee Lee. So if you want to take it away, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Just checking. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay.
Yes,
Great.
we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, so I'm Kiana Roman, and today I'm going to be speaking with my peers Noshin Mong and Kaylee Lee. And today we're here to speak on the behalf of Culver City High School students and middle school students. Oftentimes we've heard stories of students saying that they feel unsafe when they interact with security guards, and students shouldn't have to feel that way. So we reached out to our student community, and from the 200 sponsors we received, 56% of the students face some type of we're in an instance of racism, sexism, or homophobia with the security guards, and no student should have to really feel that way or even be treated that way by a security guard. And so now Nosheen and Kaylee Lee will share with you some of these specific interactions that the students shared with us.
So hi, I hope everyone can hear me all right. My name is Kaylee Lee. I'm a rising senior at Culver City High School, and basically we did a poll on our Instagram, and basically we had over 200 people answer, and 56% of those people basically said they felt they had personal experiences with the security guards that they felt were really inappropriate. So we're going to be talking about a few of them here. So based on sexism and basically having uncomfortable experiences because they were female, one Hispanic female student said that they were being teased, hit on, and even flirted with, and that the security guards were misusing their power dynamic between the minors and as authority figures. Continuing on, there were also an Asian female student that said that their friends have caught the security guards looking at them in inappropriate places, showing how the security guards, we should not be getting more guards or even funding because of the way that they are functioning now, especially compared to the other parts of our school system that could use a lot more help, and that would be helping the students specifically. Talking about homophobia with the security guards, one white male student said that one of the security guards were saying homophobic things and that they decided to overlook it. This really showing how a lot of these security guards are not really being held accountable for their actions and even behavior at the school. And then another white passing female student said that while their girlfriend and I were doing couple things next to an area where most couples are, a security guard walked up and told us to stop doing that and told us to leave, forcing us to leave, and didn't tell any other couple to do so as well. We were the only queer couple there. And this really shows the bias of the guards that they weren't enforcing the same rules to all students equally, and even picking and choosing who they wanted to address based on their own biases. So those are just a few experiences from those, and I hand it off to Machine Wong.
Thank you. Do you have anything further to share, or are you?
Nosheen, are you there? Nosheen? Kaylee, can you share her part?
Yeah, so for Nosheen, she was discussing racism. So here we go. So in terms of responses affiliated with race, we had a tremendous amount of Black and Indigenous people of color students sharing their uncomfort in terms of interactions between security guards that they saw was completely different and unfair from their white or white passing peers. So one female African-American student shared how it wasn't super aggressive, but I definitely got followed around more than my white peers an uncomfortable amount. Another African-American student accounts for how the security guard would not let her outside of campus for lunch, even though she went outside every day because she forgot her ID at home. But right before she witnessed, the security guard let out a group of Caucasian girls who were underclassmen without their IDs. Therefore, they were never meant to go outside because off-campus rights are solely reserved for seniors. There have also been multiple accounts referencing uncomfortable times that the security guards have stopped students for no valid reason. This is concerning because as school guards are put into place to make students feel safe, it's unacceptable that these guards have not only managed to make students feel uncomfortable, but uncomfortable to do so in their own skin. So that is Dean's part, but I think her audio might be messing up right now. So yeah.
Yeah, she just told us that she's here, but her mic isn't letting her unmute herself. So, yeah. Anyways, thank you, Kaylee, for sharing Nosheen's part right now. But as you can see that many students have had many uncomfortable interactions and often, I would say, unnecessary interactions with the security guards of like racism, homophobia, and sexism. So what we the students we were thinking and what we kind of want and we hope in the future that the security guards will receive. We want some implicit bias training for the security guards, and because we feel that oftentimes they don't know that they have these prejudices with them, so we believe that this implicit bias training would really help them, and then it wouldn't be just a one-time thing, it would be an ongoing training. And then we also believe that some of the money that we get, instead of hiring more security guards, because often security guards are called by teachers when they feel unsafe, or sometimes when a student is like sad, the teacher just calls them. So we believe that instead of hiring more security guards, that some of the funding should go to getting more counselors and back to our health center that we're so lucky to have, because the security guards are not equipped to handle these mental health situations. And we also believe that the security guards should get more implicit bias training because situations like this shouldn't be occurring in our school. We're only 16, most of us maybe 18. And why should somebody have to feel afraid in their school, a place where they spend half of their day in, and feel like they can't be completely themselves? I just think that's completely unacceptable and ridiculous. So yeah, that's what we're requesting: more implicit bias training for them and reallocating their funds to our health center and our guidance counselors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting that. And I'm not sure if we have members of the school board who are on this WebEx right now. If they're not, we'll be sure. We do have some.
Yeah, I'm here. It's Kelly. Hi.
Oh, so we have Dr. Kelly Kent. Did you want to do any response or to that, or I'm glad that you're here listening to that so that we can take some steps forward to address the issues that were just raised.
I am listening. I took notes. What's really important for us to hear is that I think the attention has been on the police departments lately, and more attention clearly needs to be paid to the security guards, which are not part of the police department. That is district funding, and that is district personnel. So I'm really glad that I heard that, and I wrote down all of the comments. So thank you very much for collecting that data. And
Yes,
so,
definitely.
are you
And then
hoping to come on
if you want,
Tuesday?
yeah, we are. Well, we won't be here directly, but some of our peers will be who are part of our organization, part of our group. They'll be there and they'll be at the meeting. And then also, if you want, if you didn't get all of the interaction and if you want a specific one, please feel free to email me. If you don't have my email, I think Megan has it, and I can email you some of the information that was shared with us.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for participating and for speaking up. I'll just add that we've seen in this city in particular so much leadership coming from our students. A lot of the really peaceful and quite moving protests that have happened over the past couple of weeks have all been student-led, to my knowledge. And I feel like as an elected official and also as a resident, it's afforded me just such a precious opportunity to stop being in defense mode and start being in listening mode. And I just want to thank all the leadership coming from our students that are I think, showing adults the way in terms of some of the changes that need to be happening, some of the stories that are being ignored. And so I think you're brave and awesome. And I just, I really want to thank you for all you're doing in this moment to help us bring us along and help at least my understanding evolve.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. It really does mean a lot, and we will definitely continue this work because there is just so much more for us to do. The protests and the marches are only the beginning. The real work is like getting the changes made, and yeah.
I'll also mention that Kiana was just appointed to our Equity and Human Relations Committee. So we'll be gearing that up within the next couple of months. So there's a lot of more exciting work ahead. All right, I guess the next, unless Daniel, you wanted to add anything on the student piece?
No, I'll just add whatever when we open the discussion.
Thank you. We prepared a proclamation in honor of to commemorate Juneteenth. So if we can ask Ms. Wright to go ahead and pull that up, I'm going to go ahead and read it. Oops, looks like we got one of your emails. There we go. So this is a proclamation for Juneteenth 2020. Whereas President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed the emancipation of enslaved people effective January 1st, 1863, and whereas enslavers were responsible for telling those who remained in bondage that they were free, and some, maybe many, ignored the order until Union troops arrived to enforce it. And whereas on June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger of the United States Army arrived in Galveston, Texas, and issued General Order Number 3, causing Texas, the last Confederate state, to declare that, quote, all slaves are free. And whereas 6 months later, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, abolishing slavery in the United States once and for all. And whereas that joyous day in June 1865 became known as Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, and for millions of African Americans, Juneteenth has served as an opportunity to celebrate the fundamental truth that all people are created equal. And whereas this year, the annual celebration of freedom comes as the country grapples with its longstanding history of systemic racism, as well as the fate of its Confederate monuments, flags, and symbols amid nationwide protests against police brutality and racism after the murder of George Floyd. And whereas the city of Culver City is fortunate to be a diverse community and welcomes people of all races and ethnicities, religions, and genders. And whereas, while COVID-19 and protest demonstrations will make commemorations look and feel different this year, the city of Culver City is proud to recognize and celebrate Juneteenth, Emancipation Day. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Culver City, California, hereby proclaims June 19th, 2020 as Juneteenth 2020, pays tribute to the indomitable spirit of African Americans, and calls upon the community to eliminate prejudice and celebrate the great diversity of all people. It's going to be signed by both my colleague Daniel Lee and myself, and we're really happy to be celebrating this important day in this important moment in our history, and hopefully continue this celebration in the years ahead.
Thank you, Megan. With that, I think we'll get into what most people came to this event for, the discussion. Before we do, I'd sort of like to restate some of the ground rules. We realize we're going to have a lot of different viewpoints. I think the video that Cicely shared was very indicative of the type of discussion that we want to have. We want people to practice being good listeners, being respectful, having common courtesy. If you're someone who has the tendency to talk a lot, maybe don't talk as much. You can always email us afterwards or give us a phone call if you have something pertinent to say that you are not able to say. Practice these same ground rules on social media. Once again, if you do have a problem having your picture taken, please just turn your camera off. This is an incredibly large meeting. We were at 3:45 at some point. So we want to show everybody how much of the community actually came out for this discussion. I will say one thing that we did not say at the beginning that we meant to do is do an acknowledgement that we're on Tongva land, land that was stolen from the Tongva people. I think there are a couple other tribes. We're a little bit mixed here in Culver City because of the shape of our city. And we acknowledge the genocide of the indigenous people that happened in this country prior to enslaved people being brought over from Africa. I will say, I also wanted to say, in terms of the rules, if you are making a statement, please use I statements. Please don't make generalizations. If there's something that you believe, please say it in a way that speaks for yourself and not for others. Please don't try to characterize what other people say. This is a free and open debate and a public meeting. Also, I just wanted to go back and ground the discussion a little bit in the Constitution. I think a lot of times, at least in the past, when we talk about institutional racism, people don't see it as much. But with one of the groups that I work with, Move to Amend, we're pushing to amend the Constitution to say corporations are not people and money is not speech. One of the things we talk about first is the Constitution itself and who it was written for. And if you look at our original Constitution, it really only applied to white male landowners, which means not only were women excluded, not only were enslaved Africans excluded, not only were indigenous Americans excluded, but poor white Americans were also excluded. And there's a quote I'd like to share to just drop to kick off our discussion. It's a quote from Molly Ivins. She was a reporter. She basically said, "It is possible to read the history of this country as one long struggle to extend the liberties established in our Constitution to everyone in America. And I think, as we've seen, if we're students of history, that we have these high ideals that we're told that the country was founded on, but it took years of struggle to force politicians to change policy and to force people to change culture in order for those words to have meaning for Black people, for women, for poor people, for LGBTQIA people. And to some degree, those words still don't have meaning or complete meaning for all of those groups. So the fact that we're talking about policing, institutional and structural racism, specifically around Black Americans, does not devalue those other struggles. The same way Black Lives Matter does not mean other lives don't. This discussion is about policing. I personally would like to hear your suggestions or your reactions from some of the policies that we put forward on Monday night in that discussion. I would also like to hear other creative policies that you might have that you think the city might explore going forward. But this is an open discussion. I just wanted to put those two framing statements out there because I think we'd like to go back to our colleagues with further recognition what we can do and how we can alter the nature of public safety in our city. I think with that said, since it's very hard based on the way the city clerk does things during our council meetings, I think if you would like to speak, please just put your name in the chat and we'll try to call on each of you. If you're going on for a very long time, I will ask you to wrap it up. But please put your name in the chat if you would like to speak, and we will go from there. So far, I see Joshua and Corey, so we'll start with those two names. Reminder, I will cut you off if you're talking too long. Go ahead, Joshua.
Okay, so this history that was spoken of, does that mean that every single resident in Culver City has a sort of blood guilt for all of these issues? And also, almost all lands were conquered. Indigenous people also conquered lands from indigenous people as well. So how are we supposed to give back all the land? And also, is this the context to take away our protection from future riots? Is this the context in which we're going to cripple our police force? That is all, and I end my comment.
Thank you, Joshua. Corey?
Hi. I think your proclamation is fantastic, and I'm thinking about the Culver City's history of anti-Black policies, whether it's sundown laws, redlining, restrictive covenants, as well as a significant presence of the KKK in the middle of the last century. I'm wondering if Culver City has thought about how it can pay reparations to its Black residents. That's all.
Okay, so on the first point, we are, that's a broader discussion around conquering lands and not conquering lands. What we're doing now is just honoring the land that was originally the Tongva land. We're not advocating for any particular policy at the moment, though for me individually, if we had, as a nation, just stayed true to any of the treaties that we had with Indigenous people, I feel like that would be that would take us a long way towards addressing some of the genocide of their peoples. But if you look at the history of our federal government and our policy and the number of treaties that we've actually honored, you'll see that that's not the case. Lands were conquered, agreements were made, agreements were never kept. But we're trying to keep more of the discussion on policies like that we can actually enact in Culver City. To my recollection, in terms of the second question, we have not had a substantive conversation around reparations, but we have heard that this suggestion from various residents. And before we move on to the next speakers, I'd like to give my colleague a chance to respond to those first two questions.
Yeah, thank you. There have been a resident, one of our residents who's written and researched a lot of the history and frankly, the racist history of Culver City, who has, is proposing a public apology from the part of Culver City about, our history as a sundown town and some of the racist legacy that we're still dealing with today. As part of the draft that the Equity Subcommittee is looking at and will be recommending to the full council to look at, reparations are mentioned in it. So we still are looking through, in the draft form, some of the reparations are really deal with housing. And for anybody who's paid attention to housing, redlining, housing is one of the fundamental ways that people of color in this country have been robbed. I mean, just basically robbed. And so housing, and if you see some of the homelessness numbers in the county, it is a clear expression of racist housing policies that have been around for a very long time. So we're looking at that very seriously, and would love to continue getting input from folks who are interested in having this conversation. So now I believe there are some other folks. Do you know, Daniel, are you keeping track of the deck?
Yeah, I'm keeping track. So next we have Andrew, then Shelley, then Lorraine, and Chella.
Oh, thank you very much. Not often I get to be toward the top of any speaking list, so usually I end up coming in toward the back end. So thank you, and thank you, by the way, for a wonderful hearing the other night. I sat and watched through and listened through all 7 hours, and it's always great to hear feedback from the community. And in my own personal capacity, I think that we heard a lot of great ideas out there and ones that we need to explore. There certainly are ways in which we can, maintain, not degrade our public safety, but still in our response times, but really refocus, rebuild, and reorient law enforcement to more a community-oriented a community-oriented model in which we have people who have the skills in order to address particular problems that our police force is just not equipped to handle, and re-examine the culture which has led us to where we are today. So I just wanted to thank you all for doing this, and obviously whatever on a personal level we can do to help move this conversation forward. But your leadership is very much appreciated, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the ideas here today as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Next we have Shelley.
Hi, thank you, Council Member Lee. I have a couple of specific questions. The first one is for Dr. Kelly Kent. I'm wondering if the school board is considering removing school resource officers from the schools. I've heard a lot of the students speak about that. And then to the council members who are on the line, I'm curious if anyone is considering adding one of the students from the POC for Change group to the Chief's Oversight Committee. And I'm also curious if you have any specific proposals for Monday's meeting that go to directing a defunding of the Culver City Police Department, as well as the creation of a civilian oversight committee.
Am I invited to respond in this moment? It's not clear to me that this is the place that I am supposed to be speaking, but I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. This is, am I on video? sorry, it's confusing for me if I'm on video or audio, but I will respond to the question. The school board has not entertained the conversation at all, not anywhere before in a public setting. Two school board members have expressed positions in public. I have stated unequivocally that I have always been interested in removing police from our schools and that I am certainly still interested now. And then our board president spoke last night saying that she would also consider it. And she talked about the need to really invest where students need the investment before we just start pulling resources out. And so that the question should be more about investment rather than taking away. But I am absolutely open to it. We haven't discussed it as a body. And I think in order for us to get there, students and parents need to mobilize and bring it to us so that it's obvious that that's what they want or don't want. I think right now what I've learned is that we need to have a conversation about security guards that was not on our radar. And so that actually feels like something we need to agendize right away. And so that's something I'm going to take away from tonight and put before the body and share with my colleagues.
Thank you, Kelly. And Shelley, we can't get too deeply into too many discussions around what we think of policy. Our colleague Alex Fish is also on this call, so we don't want to have a Brown Act violation. He's just listening. But at the confines of what any type of oversight would look for the Culver City Police Department have not been defined. I'm not sure if you had another question or if Megan wants to respond to that.
Well, the agenda for Monday was just posted last night. And so I noticed that there were some supplemental information about some budget changes that are proposed. And so I would invite the entire public to go to culvercity.org and look at the Monday's agenda where we should be finalizing our budget. And I know that there are some changes in response to last Monday's conversation. And so I would invite for folks to participate again on this coming Monday after having read that and seeing what you all think about it. I just read it, I just kind of scanned through it, so I haven't fully had a chance to analyze it yet, but I did notice there were some changes. For the Chiefs Oversight Committee, I believe there is a student as part of that, but we will double check. And at some point, I know that committee is going to be meeting soon, and hopefully we'll be able to, they'll give us permission to release the names of all the folks that are part of the commission. I don't even know yet, actually, who's part of the Chiefs Advisory Committee. And so that's a work in progress, and we will certainly post it once the information is public.
Well, and I'll just add, for me, I think there's a little bit of policy up in the air, because prior to the demands that the community made on us in the meeting on Monday, the advisory committee was created at the chief's impetus. But on Monday, it seemed like there was verbal agreement from the council to explore oversight. So that's the distinction that I'm making. The advisory committee has already been created. There was vague agreement on oversight, so I'm not completely sure if that would be the same committee or a different committee, or if there would be some different process to select people who would actually provide some type of oversight. So that's why I say I'm not really sure in that context. In terms of people who are on stack, I have LaRae, Chella, and Rebecca Rona. So LaRae?
Okay, I'm trying to unmute.
We can hear you.
Oh, then that's the way it goes. This is kind of a general question. The way I read the description, it sounds like this might be a series of meetings, and that tonight is focusing on policing, but other nights might be on education or other topics. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how it's intended. And Cicely had kindly offered to do a series of teach-ins. And so if you want to give us feedback about the types of topics that you'd like to hear in the future, we definitely want to move those forward. Obviously, this is equity focused because it's the equity subcommittee. And obviously it's that big, this is the moment, I think, for us to be talking about that. So that would be the general thing. I do also want to mention to everybody that we have a new acting chief. Our current chief is on medical leave. And so our acting chief, Chief Sid, has expressed the desire to listen, to get feedback, to also answer questions as well. We thought it was appropriate to save that conversation for a future meeting, but I think it could be very valuable to have that kind of interaction, and he's certainly willing to listen to the public and willing to admit that there's a lot of change that needs to be made. And so I'm hoping one of our future meetings can, where we can dialogue with him as well. So Lorraine, if you had more to your questions, please feel free to continue.
Well, I don't know if this is sort of a comment, but to the person that was concerned about defunding, at first when I heard the word, that sounded a bit scary, but when I think of it as reallocating or rebudgeting police money to other services that the police often end up taking care of, like mental health, it makes a great deal of sense. And there are other things that they do to provide security for people. So I'm quite interested in, although I'm not a resident of Culver City, I'm just interested in what people are doing and might do. And so thank you for letting me join you. And maybe there'll be something very, very local to where I live another time too. But I enjoyed the presenters, so I will tune in perhaps on other topics if I can find you guys again. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we benefited by this event being listed on the Movement for Black Lives National website as well. Next up, I have Shayla and then Rebecca Rona. And if you'd like to get on a stack to speak, please put your name in the chat. So,
hi.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for putting this together. We really appreciate it. My question is really to address the elephant in the room. How about Culver City end the drug war in Culver City? You could decriminalize all drugs and reallocate some of those monies that the police used to do on drug and alcohol calls to a group that actually handles that in the way it should.
Thank you for that comment. As I said before, we can't get too deeply into that conversation in terms of what we believe about a particular policy for Brown Act reasons. But there are cities that we could learn from in that regard who have done similar things successfully. Next, I have Rebecca Rona and then Suzanne.
Hi, greetings, council members and everyone else, audience members. I have many concerns about the police, many opinions, but I'm just going to mention a couple. It is understandable if our police at this point feel very defensive. And I would like to see some ways that whatever actions are taken could help our police to feel that some of what is going on is actually to their benefit. I'll give you an example. If the budget is careful, I'm sure that the budget will be carefully considered. I learned when I was a part of the Culver City Police Citizens Academy how many of the police officers work 12-hour shifts. To me, that is very dangerous to have really very tired individuals policing our city. I would like to see them work 8 to 5 or something of that sort, so that there wasn't that fatigue factor. I would think that that fatigue would lead to additional stress. Not a good idea. I agree with the previous speaker that defund is an unfortunate word, because to many people it sounds like eliminating the entire budget for the police, and I don't think that that makes a whole lot of sense. Reallocating is a different matter. I also think that although training of the police in our city is important, it's definitely important. I learned a fair amount about the training that police officers initially get before they are even hired. And this training is done by the Los Angeles LAPD, and it's very severe. It's very, very severe, very hard on them. And actually, for every 4 people being trained, 3 can't take it and leave. And one of them, the one who is the strongest and somehow least vulnerable, that's the one who somehow makes it through. And those are the people who are ultimately hired. So I don't know, but I have a feeling that some of those for whom it's too much are actually maybe those who are a little gentler and might be better to be hired. But that's a much greater matter. But the thing I particularly believe is that it's our method of determining whom we hire and what the system is for determining that is even more important than how our police officers are trained. I think it could make a big difference trying to identify who is particularly racist, particularly homophobic, et cetera, and eliminating those people. So that's it for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I will just say on Monday, as I mentioned, the council agreed to look at our policing and public safety policy in a comprehensive way. And I think we'll be looking at every little stop on the sector. So from training to ongoing training and things like that. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to make a part of the general plan process as well. So there will be ample opportunity for the community to add their input there. Next, I have Suzanne. I see a question in the chat that reads, with the council consider commissioning a study to examine what other U.S. cities and countries are doing to inform Culver City's next steps around rebudgeting the police and reallocating their role to social services. I think that goes without saying. Anytime we consider a change in policy, our staff does a pretty robust study of what other cities are doing. Me and my colleagues have some connections to city council members across the country, San Francisco, Minneapolis, and otherwise, that can inform those studies as well. If anyone else would like to get on stack to speak, please just type your name in the chat. And right now we'll go to Suzanne.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, now we can't hear you. We were able to hear you a moment ago.
And then you went on mute. We can't hear you now.
You need to unmute on your own computer, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, was there anybody else on stack while we try to work through issues with Suzanne?
Not at the moment, but I think we can answer one of the questions in the chat.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are, Suzanne. Go ahead.
I think we can hear you now. Oops, no, Suzanne, do you want to talk?
Okay, I think there might be some bandwidth issues happening. There was a question around LA reallocating funds to mental health for emergency response. There's a similar proposal I made at council on Monday, and on a small scale, colleagues agreed to look at that going forward. We don't have any ideas of how big or small that might be. But that's something that we're looking at going forward. So Suzanne, if you'd like to speak, I see Vicky and then Judy after you. Okay, I think we should go to Vicky then.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, hi. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. This is awesome. I have a few things I want to mention. Megan had referenced redlining, and so of course that leads to the question of homelessness. And I want to just say that I am about having homeless people in my backyard. I'm really tired of NIMBYism, and I feel that this relates directly to Black Lives Matter. And I live at the intersection, near the intersection of Sepulveda and Sawtelle, and I've been at community meetings and really advocated for having that development there, have more units for low-income people, and actually
Okay, I guess everyone's having bandwidth problems. Okay, well, maybe we'll go to Judy. And
Hi.
Vicky comes back.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Just two points of information that I learned actually. Well, one is it's just in the news that in the state assembly, they just passed a reparations bill. I don't know how far it's going to go, but it was a bill for California. Did you hear about that? It was from, yeah, okay. So I don't know, what the status of that is. And the other thing about the defund police phrase, I didn't think it meant just abolishing them. And basically, what I was told by another person who read up on it, apparently there was a big study about how to approach police changing, and the term that was always used was reallocating funds, and it never got any traction. And that one of the reasons that the defund phrase, whether it was strategically put or what, is it gained a lot of attention. It got everybody's attention, and that was the good news about it. Even though it didn't mean exactly what it said, it really did. That was the purpose of it, is that it got everybody's attention. And well, it did, I think. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for your comments. And just to clarify, there are already mental health teams in the Culver City Police Department. I think the change that many departments around the country are exploring now is deploying mental health without an officer present, because a lot of times when people are in crisis, they go further off the edge when they encounter an authority figure or someone in uniform. So that's a big policy change that people are looking at. I see Vicky's back. I have Bree and Kyle are up, but let's see if we can get Vicky to finish her comment first. Vicky?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm not sure how far I got. did you hear me make the comments, obviously, about NIMBYism and that I felt like it was important to have a space for homeless people in our community? Did you hear the part about the development that's going up at Sawtell and Sepulveda? Or was I frozen out then?
I don't think we got that part.
Okay, just real quick. So I've been at different community meetings, and I just want to really advocate and continue to advocate for, with that new development, that there be more units for low-income people. It's really a travesty. I'm really concerned about it, and there should be some units for homeless people. We really need to be doing our part. There are schools in LA that have trailers in the parking lots right now for homeless people. I also think we need to have porta potties around. It's really disturbing to see people in our alleys who don't have a reasonable place to go to the bathroom. And I feel like Black Lives Matter and Poverty Matters, and they're connected, and our redlining contributes to these issues. So I want to make those points. And then I just wanted to ask, do we have transparency in our police department with complaints that are made connected to police brutality? Is there openness about that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we do have a process to make complaints. I gotta admit, I'm not super familiar with that. I'm not sure if Megan has any more to offer on that point.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of data that's being collected and complaints, but some of the things that we've been hearing, especially lately, is that there's a tendency. Some individuals have felt like they're being discouraged from making complaints. So like big ones, those definitely filter through, and then they get, investigated, and that there's a whole process and for that matter, a legal process around that. But some of these smaller ones are a lot harder to account for. One thing that we've heard a lot from residents in our meetings and in emails and in calls is that, there's a state law that says that you have to show all the data about when somebody gets stopped, right? If they're biking or walking or driving and get stopped, that needs to be recorded. And there's a certain reporting mechanism for, demographics, et cetera, so that we can detect if there are patterns where certain people are getting pulled over more than others, right? And we have been, I've heard from our police department that they're trying to get the technical ability in order to do that. But we do know that that's a big call for transparency and accountability that's coming from the public that will help track that data, because it is hard to know when you don't have the stuff. I mean, if you just look at our current complaint log, it's not very remarkable. There aren't a ton of complaints that are made, and it's often kind of used as a way to show that, hey, see, there's no problem, right? But now I'm at least hearing from a lot of folks who are feeling like they've been discouraged from doing so. And so we want to make sure that we have processes and oversight in place to make sure that everybody's being heard in a good uniform way. So thanks for the question.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this.
Next, I have Bree Kyler. I think I didn't add Carol earlier. Bree, Kyler, Carol, Michelle, and then Rick. So Bree. If you're around and you can unmute yourself, Bree, if you're still there. Bree, I see your name. I see you unmuted, but I don't hear you. I think you're muted on your computer in some way. Okay, so it looks like you're saying you're going to type in your question. Okay. So you wanted to talk about the term defund? To urge people to consider actual defunding to abolish completely? It might seem far away or not realistic. Just repeating for the people who are on the phone.
Maybe we can move on to the next.
But I want folks to consider reading abolitionist literature from Black leaders. Okay, so that's Bree's comment. She wants people to consider abolitionist literature. There is a fairly deep police abolition movement that's been active for at least 20 years in my recollection. So that was Bree's comment. I saw Kyler say you retracted your question. So next is Carol, then Michelle, then Rick.
Thank you. First, I just want to echo the thanks for your commitment at Monday's epic city council meeting. From that meeting, I got the impression that immediate layoffs based on annual budget changes are fairly well off the table for several council members. So thinking about immediate possible actions in the vein of defunding, what I'm wondering is whether there have been discussions about the possibility of retraining and reassigning sworn officers, either to a novel service-based role within the police department or to other city departments, whether there have been discussions or whether there's anything else you know. I know you can't share much about your opinions.
Well, just to quickly answer your question to some degree, there have been suggestions from residents and stakeholders about retraining officers. We can share our positions, we just can't have deep discussion. I have a master's in social work and I'm getting my doctorate in social work. I would be more in favor of having someone who is trained and dedicated in mental health than retraining. I think that just brings up a lot of difficulties, and there's a lot of training to erase, because usually the people who are most open to that type of thing are more seasoned officers who have a lot of policies and practices that it would be hard to let go. I think this might come up again at the council meeting. So before we say anything that is close to a Brown Act violation, I would say please attend the council meeting on Monday, and we will be much more able to have a little bit more discussion around some of these policies. And then of course you can always email or call any of us. I don't know if you have any comments on that point, Megan.
No, I always encourage full participation in all of our public meetings, and I think that's the best way to communicate to the full council. And I did in the chat box put a link to the way that you can participate in our public meetings. You can register in advance, and so if you want to reference that. I know that we're in this new wonky world of meetings online, but interestingly enough, we're seeing more participation than ever. So hopefully that trend will continue. So we all want to hear from you via email and during the meetings themselves.
Okay, I see Suzanne is back. Let's see if we can have her finish her question.
Being able to speak before. Oh man.
Just
Suzanne, it seems like you have two audio sources open at the same time, causing the echo. So if you want to mute one of them.
Now?
we can hear you.
You know what? Skip me. Skip me.
Okay. Okay. You can email us, Suzanne. Next, I have Michelle.
Hi. Thank you for your leadership, the two of you. Appreciate the meeting. My concern is about demilitarization of the police. I'm totally in favor of reallocating so that there's plenty of money to serve the community with more social services. But how do we, what happens when a future council is approached by police and they're being told about good guys and bad guys and the need for militarization of those sorts of tools? And also, because we recently had the National Guard here, I wonder what happens when there's an emergency, quote unquote, emergency situation, and how future councils can make decisions that could forestall that sort of response. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Like I said, we're more eliciting responses. I think there is a mood in the country around demilitarization of the police. But I think there are a variety of opinions on that subject. I think if we really deeply consider public safety in the general plan process, then a lot of the new infrastructure that's put in place will be completely new infrastructure and fairly difficult to alter without like significant effort. So I think I hate to keep bringing it up, but I hope when the general plan advisory committee and our consultant has meetings around that process, that we have as much community participation as possible.
Yeah, and I'll add to that real quick is, a present council cannot bind a future council. That's the case for anyone. I think the important work that we're delving into with the general plan and this larger conversation right now is a real effort to change the culture. And that's going to be on all of us to continue, and hopefully that culture will shine in leadership, not only in the city, but also within the police department itself. And so honestly, it's going to take a lot of public participation to maintain that culture. We can make promises today and policies today, but it's a fact that they can be undone in the future. And so we all need to, for the things we believe in, make sure that we're front and center and present in these conversations.
Thanks, Megan.
And elections.
Definitely. Thanks, Megan. And for the comments in the chat around qualified immunity, that's pretty much something that we have to do on the state or federal level, to my understanding. Lisa Vidra is here from the city attorney's office to correct me in any way. But I think that's something that we could advocate for, but I'm not sure how much we can do as a city on that point.
Yes, and that's definitely a legislative issue for the state and federal governments.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. I'd like to, I know that not everybody has an internet connection, and we do have some people who have called in on the phone. So after we've gotten through these comments, we're going to try an experiment and open up at the end of this meeting all of the phone lines, unmute all of the phone lines. If you do not want to make a comment, please put yourself on mute. But we do also want to make sure that there's access for people who do not have computer access. So we'll see how it goes. It'll be a little bit later in this meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody had full access to make comments during this meeting.
Thanks. And the last person I actually had in my list is Rick Tuttle. Though there are a number of people I don't want to exactly call out, but I would love to encourage to speak who haven't spoken, who have either put comments in the chat, who have law enforcement experience, or who have shared opinions in the past. So if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. But I know a number of you have varied experiences and expertise that I think could inform this conversation. But in terms of the people online who wanted to speak, let's go to Rick.
Well, actually, Rick, is Rebecca, and I have spoken before. I wanted to talk about racial profiling, but if you'd rather go on to another person who hasn't commented yet, you can just let me know. Is it okay for me to go forward?
Sure, you can speak briefly, and we can then, if no one else puts their name in the chat, we can go to see if anyone on the phone has comments.
Okay. I've been particularly concerned about racial profiling for a very, very long time. And one of the problems that I see, aside from the racial profiling itself, is that as far as I know, there are basically two ways. As far as I know, there are only two ways that a person can report that he or she has been racially profiled. So one of them is to actually walk into the police station and ask to speak to someone in charge, which would be extremely intimidating for many people. The other thing is to go online to the police department website and fill out a form. And I would suspect that many, many people have no idea that that's a possibility. So I have believed for a long time that there should be a different process whereby people who believe they've been discriminated against can go to an entity outside of the police department to register their concern. And of course, ultimately, the information would be given to the police department so they'd be aware of it and records would be kept. But let's make it easier for people, particularly young people, teenagers. My goodness, it's difficult. So briefly, that's my opinion.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I think we are exploring possibilities around that. And now I think we have our final comment, and we're definitely going to follow up on that, Rebecca, from Diane.
Hi, thank you so much for putting this together. I was just wondering if there are any plans. I didn't attend the city council meeting on Monday, but I was wondering if there was any plans to have a panel or an event where the community could speak perhaps directly to police officers in the Culver City Police, and maybe we could start some conversations so they could know our concerns coming directly human to human. And, you know, could get to know them as people too. I've heard of some other events in different cities where it was almost like speed dating, where members of the community could go through and talk to police officers. And I was just wondering if there was any plan or interest in doing an event like that, so that maybe police officers can hear from the community directly, and we can hear from them as well. Thank you.
Sorry, Daniel. I mentioned a little bit earlier that our acting police chief, Sid, is very interested in this type of dialogue. So we'll be happy to organize that in the future.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, there was basically a resident organized event that was similar last year. I know Carlene was there, a number of other folks at the Peace Center, where a number of our officers, LAPD that's close by, and sheriffs that are stationed close by actually sat down and sort of like a World Cafe style and spoke with residents about their concerns. And I think that's something that we can replicate in the future. I saw a comment from, well, I saw that Suzanne, you are on a different computer. Want to try to speak one last time? Gotta unmute yourself again.
Okay.
We can hear you. I don't hear an echo.
Okay.
Now you're muted again.
Okay. I unmute. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize for all the screw ups, but anyhow, two comments. Early on, we mentioned empathy, and literally 50 years ago in Mobile, Alabama, it was all the integration going on, and I think the group is called Human Training Labs, where they actually had workshops. I did mine at Spring Hill College in Mobile, where they had the people of the blacks and whites getting, it was very structured. In fact, I met one of the trainers later, an African-American woman from MIT, a PhD from MIT. I called her the other day. We became friends. She's 95 now, but she could not remember the details or any links I could give you. But I'm sure they exist because recently at the Willow School here in Culver City, I went to one of their, they didn't call it an equity workshop, it was called emotional intelligence. And the presenter was a woman of color, a Puerto Rican, and brilliant PhD. And what she did in an auditorium with people sitting next to each other, it brought everybody into deep empathy. So I know the trainings are available. I would highly recommend, so that the police don't feel we're just throwing them away, and that the people don't feel, here we go again. You know, in 67, they did the whole big commission reports and all after the riots in Newark, and nothing ever happened. And all too often, nothing ever happens, you know, too much study and no action. So let's see if Culver City can put its face on the map to lead other cities by example with these trainings that help both sides get to see how we need to work together for the greater good. So that was item one. Item two is I was totally taken aback when the mayor the other night said, or maybe I was tired and didn't hear him right, that we don't really need a civilian oversight commission because the council does that. I beg his pardon, but he's not elected and you're already doing oversight. We need people. And as I got some of the comments toward the end, or part of them, we do need people who do a hearing of people who have complaints, so that you have an intermediary between the police rather than going to the people who are supposedly the abusers, who may or may not be the abusers, having the intermediaries who are trained to listen and then help advise in whatever ways, maybe tied in with equity commission. So these are just very rough thoughts, brainstorming to see how we can work together for the greater good of the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. So we just have Mark and we can go to some calls to see if anyone on the phone wants to speak. I just want to reiterate that even though no action was taken, there are 3 council members who nodded their heads in favor of creating some venue for civilian oversight at Monday's meeting. So that's something that needs to be worked out, but there was already agreement to do that. So Mark.
Hi. Start my video. Oh. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. Wanted to ask, a lot of times there's this belief that police departments just have a few bad apples in them. But oftentimes I feel like it's the good apples aren't allowed to speak up and make changes. Is there a policy for protecting whistleblowers at the police department?
And that's a good question, Mark. I'm not aware. I would defer to Megan on that question. I think there are policies around intervention in terms if you see another officer violating policy, but I don't know about whistleblower policies.
I wonder if any of our staff would care to address that for clarification.
Hi, everyone. It's Serena Wright. And I'm sorry, I didn't hear the complete question. I did hear about whistleblowers. Is the question how to report whistleblower complaints?
I think it was if police officers themselves had whistleblower protections and had the ability to make complaints from within the department.
Yes, they can, and they can either do that through the city attorney's office or through HR. We also have a hotline, and that hotline can be accessed off the city's website.
Thank you, Serena. And I think maybe going forward, we can possibly think of a way to highlight some of the things that already exist in terms of filing police reports, whistleblowers, and things that might not be as prominently displayed as we look towards making more substantive change down the line so that people are more informed of what we have in place right now. Maybe we can just come up with a one sheet. That's another conversation, I guess, for the equity subcommittee, but I think that might be useful. I think the last person on stack is, well, I see Leah Pressman, but first we have Sonia, then Leah, then we'll try to see if we have any questions from our callers. Sonia?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, thank you for this opportunity. I just wanted to mention the People's Budget, which is a participatory budget process that was led by many different organizations in LA, many of whom are pro-abolition, and including the Black Lives Matter LA chapter. And they have put together a budget that included surveys of over 200,000 Angelinos, and are there proposing cutting the police budget from 50% down to 1%. And I just wanted to lift up their efforts and ask if Culver City would consider a participatory budgeting process similar to that, especially one that would focus on people of color and the low-income communities in Culver City in order to make those voices heard in the budgeting process. And lastly, I just wanted to echo the importance of investing in housing as part of addressing racist institutions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I am personally familiar with the People's Budget, and I know a lot of people who put it together. One of the things that I highlight to a number of different people is a lot of the people working on the People's Budget were working on it prior to the murder of George Floyd, and a lot of them have been advocating for similar cuts for years, and a lot of them have made proposals for years. So what they're doing there is part of an organizing process where they have met with and done their research and sort of really countered some objections from council and from the city of Los Angeles. I think my personal opinion you will hear on Monday, and you've probably heard before. But I think in order to make that type of substantive change, we need the continued participation of all of our residents and stakeholders. And you know, we're blessed with a very large brain trust in Culver City. I actually reached out to Kella Lytle Hernandez from the Ralph Bunche Center and the $1 Million Hoods Project to see if she would advise us on police policy. She's incredibly busy. She's a MacArthur Genius winner, but she said time permitting, she might be able to. But there are a lot of things that I think we are very interested in exploring. I'm very interested in exploring, sorry, I statements, but it really takes people showing up both to the council meetings and the general plan process meetings where we're actually talking about these topics. Emails are appreciated, phone calls are appreciated. Showing up is much more powerful. Yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on that, Megan, but I'm intimately familiar with the People's Budget.
Yeah, I'll say that you know, we have this real opportunity to make deep and transformative change. We've had a status quo that honestly has rarely been called into question in a meaningful way in the city. And it so happens that this whole national conversation is happening at the same time when we're actually writing the constitution of our city. We're updating the general plan. And I think that's why there have been a lot of residents who have called for us to address policing in the general plan being this blueprint for all policies in the city. And so, as was stated earlier, you know, as for the People's Budget or for any type of real systemic change, it's going to take a lot of analysis. It's going to take a lot of feedback. I know because I work on a board with one of the council members from Minneapolis, Philippe Cunningham, that, you know, what they're doing in Minneapolis is actually spending a year speaking to their residents and their communities to find what alternatives that really respond to the community's needs in this moment and for the future. And so that means, you know, I think I've heard our city council make a commitment to some immediate changes, but those long-term changes are going to take a lot of thought, a lot of consulting with community, and a lot of time. And so I think that's if we're successful, and I believe we have support for going forward in making sure that policing is part of our general plan update and a focus of it. And that means that all of these ideas and this process is going to be happening over at least the next year, so that we can, you know, so that we can right size the services and reallocate. You know, what today is 38% of our entire discretionary budget, which is put into policing. And that means, especially in a time of austerity, that a lot of that money are not going in, you know, it's not going into other services. And so we have an opportunity to rethink and to maybe be smarter with the money that we have, get better and more services, and ones that don't have, you know, the potential violence and problems that we've had with policing throughout the nation and even in our city as well. And so this kind of bold systemic change is going to take time and patience, but I'm really glad that we're launching it together and that so many people have been part of this conversation. And I'm hoping right now that we can open up to callers and see how that works, so that they have full participation as well.
And I would also, I think it would be instructive for a lot of people to look at Monday's council meeting and maybe some social media from your various council members to see where we stand, because we cannot talk about things in depth on this call for Brown Act reasons. But this is also a political question, and some of the politicians that you might need to move to get greater consideration for some of the ideas that you're putting forward might not be on this call. So I would encourage you to look at our social media, look at the notes from Monday's meeting, get a really good grasp of where we are, and then define your targets, because there's only so much that certain council members can do on their own. If there is broader support from the council itself, then we can do more. But for Brown Act reasons, there are very large limits to what we can do to influence the opinions of our colleagues.
Well, and I'll add social media is a fickle thing. So I would say email is also a good way of communicating too.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, you know, look at our Facebooks, maybe look at our Twitters, perhaps. You'll see where people are, and maybe you'll get some targets. Okay, let's go to Leah because we're running out of time.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
please.
Sorry.
Hi. So I wanted to ask about the Culver City Police Department's proactive policing policy. Is that being re-examined? Because it seems that the proactive policing ends up in a lot of racially motivated stops. So that's one thing. And then I also want to ask about some of these reforms that we put into place with great hopes it would help that don't seem to help a lot, specifically the body cameras. I put a comment in the chat and I was wondering about, you know, if someone feels like they had a very bad encounter with the police and they've requested body camera footage, do they get it or is there a long process? Those are my questions.
I believe if it's you, you're able to see that, but maybe Ms. Vidra could help us out here.
Hi, this is Lisa. I can speak in generalities, but the disclosure of body cam footage has several aspects. One is it's subject to state law, but it's for certain critical type incidents. Other incidents are in a police department policy. If it doesn't fall under a critical incident, then it's at the discretion of the police chief. So it's very detailed and very complicated on the release of body cam footage. If that's a little summary, I hope that helped.
Yeah, and some of the reasoning that I've heard behind the complication is that it's respecting folks' privacy as well, because if there are other people who are involved other than yourself, there could be complications about protecting their privacy. But
correct, there's the privacy issue, and a bigger issue is whether or not there's an ongoing criminal investigation at the time. Which plays into state law as well, and there's timelines that the chief can delay the disclosure. So as I said, it's a whole analysis with a lot of factors that's gone through.
And I would invite you, so obviously we don't personally control state law, but we do have oversight over the police policy manual, some aspects of it that are within the Culver City purview. That is a document that is online. A couple of years ago, I went through a very encouraging a process where we sat down with our police department and some community members to make sure that our sanctuary city policy was enshrined in the police policy manual. That is a rare thing, and I think a very good thing. And so we have had these moments where we've taken a really close look at our own policy manual and made changes to it to be responsive to Culver City. So as long as it complies with state and federal law, what we do have control over in Culver City, I would invite folks to take a look at that document, which is online, and share your thoughts and comments about it, because that really is key. So before the end of the hour, can we try the callers?
Sure. Let's see if we have any questions from anyone on the phone. Okay. Where are those callers? It looks like you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering if you had tackled the problem of qualified immunity, number one. Number two, have you found out about the police union, how they defend their police? I took a survey of all the people that were stopped. That's not exactly accurate because it's only when I was driving by, but more than half of the people that were stopped were people of color. And you know, the problem is that this is not very transparent to the people of the city. And so this needs to be made more transparent, and we need to get some people.
So I think we're hearing some other crosstalk. So if somebody's on the phone but you're not speaking directly, could you please mute yourself? Thanks. Also for your own privacy's sake.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Lisa Vidra from the city attorney's office said before, qualified immunity itself is not really within our jurisdiction. It's something that we can advocate for, but that's a state or federal concern. I'm happy to reach out to our representatives on the state and federal level. I think you'll find that they're already working to eliminate it, particularly Karen Bass, who is leading the Justice and Policing Act at the federal level. And in terms of transparency, I think that's what we really need a lot of input about as we look forward to looking at our processes in the future. If there are discrete areas where you have very specific suggestions or concerns, that's what we're looking for. I know a lot of people want transparency when it comes to demographics around police stops and tracking those and seeing who gets stopped and who doesn't. I know a lot of people want transparency around use of force. When was it used? Who was it used on? And various things like that. And I think those are all things that we need to consider. And I think they're all things that all of the council is actually really open to considering. Part of the purpose of this conversation was to elicit more ideas like that, so that we can have more suggestions for our colleagues as we continue this process, both in the short term, whatever we manage to get done before the end of June, and then in the long term as we reimagine how public safety will look in the city going forward. And we're over time right now. I wanted to see if we have any other questions from callers.
Yes, I have one. Hi, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about qualified immunity. I would suggest anyone who's interested in getting rid of that to write directly to our reps, which for most of us in this area are going to be Holly Mitchell and Sydney Kemlane. I don't know how to say her middle name, Kemladger. Yeah, so that's District 30 and 54. If you're not in Culver City and you don't know your particular state representative, not just Karen Bass on a federal level, but on the local level, you can go to openstates.org, find your legislator, and find out who to write to. But when they get written letters, there's like a number system for writing into them, and that they can use as leverage in terms of advocating for certain things. So if you know what qualified immunity is and you don't think the cops should have it, which I personally do not at all, please write to your reps. Let them know. Colorado just passed a law, SB 217, which got rid of qualified immunity for police. And I think that went in like yesterday or today. So just, contact them, and also reach out to Governor Newsom, because, it will eventually end up on his desk if they actually do write something. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And in the interest of staff time and really acknowledging that this is a Friday night and they've been doing, as we have, a whole lot of extra council meetings and subcommittee meetings and all types of meetings. I want to see if one person has one last burning comment or question And if not, then we can wrap up. So one last chance for someone. Okay, I see Suzanne, and that's about it.
Oh.
We can't hear you again, Suzanne.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Now that we know Colorado has done it, how about we all Monday night request of the city council to write a letter as a city council to Governor Newsom and our senator and our reps that we would like the state to do that also for California, or give an exemption to Culver City to do it. Do it meaning the qualified immunity abolition.
Thank you, Suzanne. And that is completely up to our residents and stakeholders to decide to do or not do. We do have a meeting on Monday, and it starts at 7. Let me see, do any of the speakers, Megan or Cicely, have any comments they want to add as we close?
I just would like to thank everybody. It was wonderful to see your faces, to hear your voices. We hope that this is the start of an ongoing series on not only just continuing with this topic, but other topics of interest for our community. So I am very, very pleased to have been a part of this, and I look forward to hearing people's feedback and suggestions for what our future series might cover. Thanks.
Thank you, Cicely. Thank you so much for offering to do this with us, especially on Juneteenth. And I just want to give a huge shout out to our staff. We've got an excellent team in Culver City, and we've been part for the past several years of a program called GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And so thankfully, we have an outstanding cohort that has been really looking at how government, local government, is an instrument of systemic racism and how we can fix that. And so we've got some beautiful, beautiful hearts and minds that are part of the solution. I'm glad we got a head start on that work because frankly, we need it more than ever. And I just want to appreciate we had so many people participate. We want to do more. We thank you. We want to hear your voices, and that's going to make a tremendous difference in the way this city runs. So thanks.
And I just add to Megan's thanks, both to Cicely and to staff for really getting things together incredibly quickly and making this happen. But also to all of you participants. Like I said, I think at one point we're at 345, which is pretty good for a public meeting, even on a popular topic at the moment. So I hope, I hope to some degree this technology facilitates, further participation along those lines. But I do want to reiterate that some of these questions that we're talking about are political questions, and sometimes they don't move just by suggesting a policy that might be supported by evidence to have a beneficial impact. Sometimes the impact that needs to be made is on politicians in particular. So I would encourage people, in addition to doing their research, to continue to talk to all of us and suggest your ideas. And, as someone from an organizing background, continue to put pressure on us. With that, I'll just say thank you. Like we said, this is the beginning of a series. I see Rick suggested doing a session on intersectionality. I think that's a good idea. Be great to see if Kimberly Crenshaw's at UCLA at some point. Maybe she can actually come in and talk about it. But we would also, I think, encourage other suggestions for topics from residents and stakeholders as well. But with that, I think we can wrap it up and say goodnight.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good and safe weekend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cicely.